Welcome back to the Cruise Elite podcast. What's up, Tony?
Good morning. Mercifully late morning. Thank you for that. It's been a busy weekend. Been working late.
I was going to say, you probably had some late night gigs, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my schedule is just like all over the place. I feel like if there was one thing I could improve for my health and fitness, it would be having like a consistent sleep schedule.
Mm-hmm.
But that is not in the cards for me in my current form. Just got to try to get everything else in order and triage that as much as possible, right?
Yeah, I hear you. I'm all excited. I'm going to Maine tomorrow. Well, we don't really actually leave till Wednesday, but I'm going to meet a buddy tomorrow, and then we head up to Maine. So it'll be great.
Going fishing?
Going fishing, yep. Just every September, do this little Maine trip. So, yeah, we've been excited for a while. Although we needed some rain and we didn't get it. So my fingers are crossed that the conditions are okay. We're having a crazy drought in the Northeast. Just everything's low.
And that means the fish don't come up for food as much?
It just depends on the scenario. For us, it matters because the river that we're going to be fishing flows into a lake, and the fish actually come from the lake. And every single fall, they release some water from the dam that's about 6 miles upriver. And this year, they didn't have the water to really make the release like they usually do because it's been so low. So they did make the release, which is good, but it's not as much water as usual. So our fingers are kind of crossed. We might have to change our game plan when we get there, but there's other places to go and stuff with just a further drive. So we'll see what happens.
So I got the impression from a young age, and I don't know if this is true at all or not, but like, you know, like sometimes you go hunting or you go fishing because you want the fish. Like it's about the haul.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of given the impression that it's the journey more so than the actual yield, right? Where do you fall on that?
Yeah, depending on the type of angler that you are. For me, it's more of the journey and the experience just because I'm a catch and release angler. Yeah, so I'm all into it for all the other reasons besides the harvest, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but you still get like an adrenaline rush, right? When you got something on the line.
Oh gosh, yes. Oh yeah, for sure. That's part of the enjoyment. I guess what I mean is my primary goal is not to go fishing to put food on the plate.
Right.
You know? And I'm not against it in any way, really. And I would in certain scenarios, but for me it's just the journey and the experience and catching fish the way that you want to and challenging yourself, and then the places it takes you and, the friends that you might have to share it with, all those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But is it still a better day if you're pulling up fish versus none?
Honestly, yeah. I mean, everybody wants to catch. Yeah. Everybody wants to catch something. So it adds to it for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I'm super excited for you. And glad we're going to get this episode in before you take off.
Totally, yeah. I'll be off the grid there for 4 or 5 days, which will be nice.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
That'll be good.
Beautiful. Well, today we've got a fun episode.
Yeah.
You and I were talking the other day about ideas, and one of the ones that we were both pretty excited about was finding your high payoff drills and exercises.
Right.
We've talked a lot about very specific systems and issues and assessments that might work for each of those, drills that might be helpful in different scenarios. But if you're starting from the beginning and you're just trying to figure out, okay, what are some of my high payoff drills?
Right.
Where do you begin?
That's great. It's kind of cool because this is where I like to tell people that you don't need to be a world-class expert in applied neurology in order to practice applied neurology and to use it for yourself. Knowing stuff definitely helps in the long run if you're trying to be more targeted with, solving a pain issue or, improving some kind of movement limitation or whatever. But really where it begins is with the assessment process. So we've talked about that, several times now. And I guess what I'll kind of quickly graze over that just for our listeners as maybe a review. If you've
Mm-hmm.
been to any of my free master classes, we really built the master class around this idea of the assessment process. But if you're a new listener, this will be important for you to hear. We have something called the immediate feedback assessment process. And that is where it begins. And what this means is that you have some form of assessment that you can use to set a baseline for yourself in terms of how you feel and how you're moving in the moment. And so if you have watched any of my content like on YouTube or been to the masterclass, what you often hear me or see me sharing is how simple range of motion testing is for assessing. And what that means is you just have some kind of movement, be it a forward bend or a trunk rotation or a shoulder internal rotation or some kind of more global movement like a squat. You need some kind of movement to help you establish your baseline so that you know where you are right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really simple to do. It literally just takes, several repetitions of that movement to give you that baseline. And then you go and you find a drill, whatever that drill is, and you apply that drill, right? We would call that the applied stimulus. And then immediately after applying the drill, you would then use that baseline assessment again. And you play this game of what we call better, same, or worse, where you've applied the stimulus and now you want to see what your body's response is to applying that stimulus. So if I did a mobility drill for my knee, I would immediately reassess using that same baseline, even if the baseline assessment seems unrelated to the knee. Like a forward bend, somebody who hasn't experienced this yet might be like, well, what does a forward bend or trunk rotation have to do with my knee and my knee pain?
Yeah.
And so it's an important question to ask, because what we're actually doing at this level when you're learning how to use the assessment process is we're asking your brain and nervous system, do you feel safe about the applied stimulus? And so it's more of a global interpretation of whether or not the nervous system is happy or sad about the input that you provided. So the actual assessment does not necessarily have to have super specificity to the issue that you're trying to solve. So I could use a forward bend or a shoulder internal rotation, even though I'm performing a knee drill because my knee hurts.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you play this game, better, same, or worse, where the immediate outcome of performing that drill is either going to improve you, which means that in this scenario, your range of motion would get better, or it'll keep you the same, which means no change, or you might even get worse. And there's actually reasons for why you might get worse. So real simple, 3 steps: establish your baseline. So we get that range of motion test, apply your stimulus, whatever that might be, and then immediately reassess with that same baseline. And then ask yourself, better, same, or worse.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the process in a nutshell. And this is where it begins in terms of finding your high payoff drills.
Yeah. Yeah. So it makes sense that people would think like, oh, my knee hurts, let me do a movement that has to do with my knee pain.
Sure.
Right. And I've fallen into that habit because to me, it's just so useful to be like, my knee pain is there. So it's like, is it going to get better or worse? That's like really easy for me to focus on.
Right.
But what you're saying is that's not really necessary. So if anything can be an assessment, how do you choose what that assessment is?
Yeah. So I think this requires a little bit of exploration at first, because each person seems to have 1 or 2 range of motion assessments that give them the fastest, most reliable information in terms of their reassess. So what I do is, on my master classes and stuff, I give people these range of motion assessments. So the first one that we often recommend is just a basic forward folding motion. So you just bring your knees to a comfortable position, bend over at the waist, reach your fingertips towards the ground. Okay, that's one of them. How far did you go? That kind of thing. Another one is from a neutral stance. You straighten your arms out in front of you and put your palms together, and you rotate as far as you can to the right or as far as you can to the left without allowing your feet to pivot. So it's like a full body rotation.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also do some for the shoulder. So we've got, if you bring your arms up, bent arms out to your side, you can rotate your shoulder in. You could rotate your shoulder out if you wanted to use like external rotation. But you could also, with a straight arm position, raise your arm up overhead in what is called shoulder flexion, or abduction, where your arm remains straight, but you raise it and travel away from your midline.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those are really, really simple. You can use anything you want if something like some position is important to you. So for example, somebody might say, well, I've been working on my squat depth for a long time because I have hip mobility limitations or ankle mobility limitations, and squat depth is important to them. And so what I'm saying is that specific position of the squat could actually be your assessment too. So I would just encourage people to try some of the basic range of motion assessments that I just described, but then also think about what other positions are important to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then that can also be part of your range of motion. And then you explore it, right? You just kind of play this game where it's better, same, or worse, and you're trying different inputs and different exercises, and maybe you are experiencing or trying two range of motions. Maybe you decide to try forward bend and trunk rotation, and you're kind of learning which one of those responds the most for you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just going through this process of kind of gaining some body awareness to how things change, better, same, or worse, with every individual input that you apply. It's a really fun experience at first because you get a sense for how sensitive, I guess I would say, the nervous system is, and how our output is always changing because our nervous system is always monitoring input.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're doing is playing with inputs. We're playing with sending information to the brain and seeing which inputs make the biggest change for us. A positive change is generally what we call high payoff, right? That's the language. High payoff means something improved for you, and it seems rather drastic or impactful. Whereas we also sometimes say threatening. When something is threatening and your nervous system kind of puts the sad stamp on it, it can actually reduce your performance, in which case your range of motion assessments could get worse, which is also very kind of interesting to experience when you have not done anything like this before. Because a lot of times not a lot of times, like almost every time, people will go through this process and they're like, okay, so yeah, I guess my forward bend did get better, but that's just because I'm getting warmed up.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I work with people in person, I'm like, do me a favor and do 40 forward bends if it makes you feel better, so that you can prove to yourself that you're warmed up. Okay, so just get that out of the way, please.
And confounding variables,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. And so then, we're going through the process and people are like, oh yeah, I guess my forward bend's a little better, but it's probably just because I'm warmed up. And then they do a drill that happens to be perceived as threatening by their nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And their forward bend regresses like 6 inches. And they're like, what the heck? What did you do to me? What happened? Like, why did I get worse? It's funny because that's usually the bigger buy-in moment than helping somebody get better. Because you know how like the human brain works, like you don't want to necessarily trust when something has improved.
Yeah.
There's like a lot of people are like that.
I'm definitely predisposed to be like, well, this changed, but like, I don't know.
Yeah. Like, could it be this? Could it be that?
Yeah.
And then it kind of circles back to, well, could it be the drill? Right. And it's like, you just actually, because people don't look at exercise as an input. Right? They're like, oh, I'm strengthening muscles, right? Or I'm doing this mobility drill, but they're not necessarily looking at a mobility drill as a massive combination of different inputs that activate different nerve fibers let's say at the tissue level, right, as you're moving. And then they don't look at exercise as something that's activating a peripheral nerve.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't look at an exercise as something that has an impact on the spinal cord
Mm-hmm.
or the cerebellum or the brainstem or the cortex. And the fact is, every single exercise that we use does have an impact on all of those different things and more. And that's why we call it an input. So when we start playing with inputs, function begins to change. And what we're doing with this like better, same, worse game is we're seeing what does the nervous system perceive as safe and valuable, in which case it will grant you better performance in the moment. That's what's really cool. So if you hit a high payoff drill, you will generally see that your range of motion gets better. Maybe your pain decreases. Maybe you're moving a little bit more efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
If you happen to hit a threatening drill, the nervous system is not so sure about it for different reasons. That's when your performance can actually deteriorate and regress. So it's a fun experience if you have never done anything like it before.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like what you're encouraging is sort of like a playful sense of experimentation
Definitely.
and picking some of these movements as baselines of a forward bend, a squat, a arm raise, but like doing that consistently enough that you can really decide whether this is helping, hurting, or causing no change.
Yeah. Yes. And so there's several different types of people that I think of when I go over this and teach it. So some people are going to take this idea and run with it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're already so body aware that they're going to be able to sense all these small changes that are happening in their movement. If someone's forward bend improves 2 inches, that might actually seem like a lot to them. And they are very dialed in on when that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great. That type of person will thrive with this idea right away. And then it's very simple. It's very logical. Do the stuff that makes you better right now, and don't focus on the stuff that makes you worse. Now, my opinion on that changes over time as you come through our educational process with
Sure.
our master classes to this podcast to our courses, because eventually I circle back and say, okay, guess what? It's not okay that moving your ankle in that way is causing a bunch of perceived threat.
Yeah.
We really need to go and fix that.
We need to build resilience, right?
Exactly. And we've got to figure out how to de-threat that idea so that your nervous system is happier about it and feels safe moving your ankle. Because
Mhm.
if your ankle is causing some kind of perceived threat, well, that's happening to you every single day and every single moment of your life. And that's going to be contributing to that threat bucket, right? So we do circle back to this idea eventually and say, well, we got to start paying attention to the things that are causing more threat so that we can fix them. But at the beginning, this idea of what we call the threat reduction phase is so important. Go and practice your high payoffs, the things that are making you better, the things that help you move better and feel better, and the
Mhm.
things that decrease your pain. Sometimes, and it's pretty high percentage, practicing the drills that are high payoff and focusing on those actually decreases a lot of threat over time. And
Mhm.
then sometimes when we return to exercises that were previously threatening or giving us threatened responses, a lot of times they're not threatening anymore because you did such good threat reduction work.
Mhm.
So we always encourage our students when they're starting to get into applied neuro to, for their own body, for their own health, spend several months in this threat reduction phase where you're kind of hunting down all of these high payoff exercises. This can be really good for your overall health and performance.
So you're trying some movements, you're trying some different things. Maybe you find something that you think is high payoff, but maybe it's not consistent.
Mhm.
Today, I got 2 inches more of range of motion on my forward bend after doing this drill.
Mhm.
But tomorrow, I get less
Yeah,
or no change.
sure.
What's going on there?
Yeah, a couple things come to mind. So, for some people, especially individuals who have pretty good training and conditioning under their belt, or just, they have a history of being an athlete, they're used to going under load and dealing with a lot of stimulus all at once. That type of person sometimes requires more and more load in order to maintain the same responses from a drill. So, an example of that would be, okay, I take an athlete and I teach them a basic mobility drill for their hip. We do the drill, we get a good response, changes in range of motion. We're calling it a high payoff exercise. Several days later, they're not really getting that same response. They're not getting worse, but they're not getting the positive response that they got when we did it together.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are capable of making such quick adaptations that the stimulus is no longer novel enough to the brain to have that same kind of impact on their performance. So, in other words, your brain kind of gets bored. It's like, all right, I'm familiar with this input. It's not as novel as it was the day I learned it. So you don't see as drastic of a change in output as you did on day one. And so when that happens, oftentimes we have to, well, let me just back up and say that doesn't mean it's bad. And it doesn't mean that it's not worth practicing. But if you are trying to really keep that particular drill one that's high payoff, by adding some kind of load and complexity to the way that you're practicing it, you might now start to see those really positive responses again because it becomes more novel. So we take that same hip mobility drill that we started with, and maybe now we're attaching a band to it to create more resistance. Or we change the speed of what we're doing. Maybe you learned it at kind of a slow, very kind of coordinated speed. And now we switch you to what we call super slow, where one single repetition might actually take 30 or 45 seconds to complete. That's actually an increase in complexity and load. It doesn't have to be, sometimes when I say load, people assume I mean resistance.
Yeah.
But I don't always mean resistance. I mean complexity. So by changing the speed, changing the level of resistance that you are up against, or maybe even changing the position of the body, by changing some variable, we can bring that novelty back into the drill and keep a high payoff drill continuing to be a high payoff drill.
Yeah.
So that's one idea. That's one thing that comes to mind. The other thing that comes to mind is somebody who practices a drill, they get a certain response from it, and then several days later, they can't get that same response. Maybe it's now even making them worse, and maybe it's even creating some symptoms if we're talking about a pain issue or something. One of the things we educate a lot about inside our platform is this idea of metabolic health being very paramount for neurologic changes to take place. So we talk a lot about fuel capacity and how the way that we're fueling our brain and our body really matters. So do any kind of metabolic concerns that people might have. And there's so many different things within that list. Those types of things can really alter nervous system function. And sometimes the mixed results that a person might be experiencing leads you back to the fact that they have some kind of metabolic concern, some kind of energy uptake problem, some kind of fuel capacity issue if they're not nourishing their brain and body the way that it needs. We can see that very easily in the way that a person assesses. And mixed findings or results that don't seem to stick, those are very indicative of some kind of fuel issue.
Yeah, you use the term fuel case sometimes. It's
Yeah.
like, I've tried everything. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yep.
Maybe let's look at fuel as
exactly. And you can see that presentation in a couple different ways. You can actually experience the mixed findings in the same session. So somebody who has a very, a somewhat more concerning fuel capacity issue will get better from a drill and then 5 minutes later get worse from the same one.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you'll see that these same people have what we would call like a floating pain type of syndrome, where let's say they have right hip pain. You do some stuff for the right hip, they get a good assessment, everybody's happy. 10 minutes later, instead of right hip pain, now they have left shoulder pain. You do some stuff for the left shoulder, they improve, fantastic. They go home, they start doing their homework drills, they come back to you several days later and they go, well, the hip was fine, the shoulder ended up being fine, but the next day I had neck pain. Like those times, that kind of cycling pain issue where the pain is kind of floating around to different body parts and you're seeing mixed findings as you work through the assess reassess, that is more indicative of a fuel issue too.
Yeah.
Which is important to know because that can be very confusing and frustrating, especially for health and movement pros who are trying to learn this material. And you are going to have clients with this issue because let's face it, most of the people who are seeking out coaches and therapists and doctors for some kind of issue that they're having, most of those people have been to lots of different professionals and things didn't help them. So they've tried lots of different things and they've got, they've had this experience over and over again where something might help and now it doesn't. That is more of a metabolic level type issue that's hindering their progress.
Mm-hmm. I do want to talk about the psychological aspect of this because when it happens to you, at least this has been my experience, you can kind of feel like you're in no man's land. You can kind of feel like you don't know which way is up. This drill worked for me today. It didn't work tomorrow. Am I doing something wrong?
Yeah.
Do I need to abandon this drill altogether and find something else? And especially when pain is added to the equation.
Yep, that's very
it can
challenging.
be really demoralizing to not know what's helping and what's hurting or why things are changing. Do you have any words of advice around kind of just that mental aspect of this whole process?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is this. So here's the thing. Dealing with pain when you have fairly good tools, even if you don't know a lot yet, but you do know this assess reassess process and you do have good exercises to work through and maybe good advice from somebody that's helping you. Dealing with pain, or I should say, getting pain to change in a positive way is actually very easy. It's not that hard. In fact, pain is more like an emotion. Pain comes and goes depending on your state. Unless you have a health issue that your brain and body is sounding the alarms on and they want you to know about it. So that means when pain is very stubborn and you can't get it to move, as we say, sometimes like, hey, did we move the pain? What I mean by that is, did we change it? It was an 8. Did we get it to a 6? That's what I mean by moving the pain. Pain is relatively easy to move because all you're doing is affecting brain function, and pain is a construct of the brain. And so when you change input, you change output, and pain is an output. That is not really different than, hey, I'm sad today. And then my best friend cheers me up. And now I'm not as sad. Right? That's literally what I mean by changing the pain experience. But when pain is very stubborn and it will not change and you can't move it at all, that is usually an indication that there's more of a health issue going on. And I don't necessarily mean anything super concerning. I guess what I want people to know is the level of pain that you feel does not necessarily have a relationship to the severity of the problem. Pain is very weird, and there's a lot of factors that go into it. But it's very hard to navigate that situation. And if you're kind of stuck and you're not finding the change at all, that is one of the signals or kind of red flags that you want to be able to observe and kind of take a step back and be like, well, do I have maybe something else that's impacting me here? And I've got to figure out things I can do to help on a different front than necessarily doing more knee exercises for my knee pain.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is that? I mean, I think a lot of that will come back to the fuel idea that we grazed over.
Mm-hmm.
Is your body nourished enough? Because if it's not, that's going to affect your pain levels. So that's going to be a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we have to take a step back because we're having a lot of inflammatory factors come up from movement. So we might be choosing the wrong kind of movement. Got to chill out, try something different, maybe take a bigger step back and be like, let me go do some other self-care things that sort of seem unrelated,
Mm-hmm.
but in the end are not, because we're affecting the whole threat bucket, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So that's an important piece to know, is that it actually is somewhat simple to move the pain and at least give you a clue that you're on the right track. And if you're struggling to find that clue and you are trying different things, see, this is where it's a little bit challenging for me, because someone who hasn't learned our system, if you want to call it that yet,
Mm-hmm.
they say they've tried everything. But what they might mean is, I have knee pain and I tried a bunch of different knee exercises, but they haven't necessarily tapped into some of these other systems that we talk about all the time, because they don't know they exist.
Yeah.
They don't know that a vision exercise could help their knee pain, or a vestibular exercise,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or a breathing exercise,
Mm-hmm.
or some kind of neuromechanic drill. Like, these are things that are unfamiliar to them. So there's so many options, which makes it challenging, but it's also freeing,
Mm-hmm.
because once you go from a place of, well, I tried like 50 knee exercises and none of them helped me, but then you get exposed to applied neurology and all the different things that we can do to have an impact on our output, it's very freeing, because like, oh, I said I tried everything. All I did was try proprioception.
Right.
Because that's what most people are trying, is just proprioception. They're not trying all these other things that we teach about, because they don't know they exist yet. So that's a challenging position to be in at first, especially when you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
You know,
Right.
you don't know what you don't know.
You know? Yeah. So maybe two things, if I could distill kind of some of the practical advice out of that, is A, don't give up.
Yes,
Try different drills, or try varying the dosage, or look at other factors. Make sure that you are getting good sleep. Make sure that you are
definitely.
eating enough, or you're fueled for your workout. You were talking about a client that had this kind of floating pain, and you literally just had them drink orange juice when
Oh
they were
man,
working out,
I've
and it
had
made a
several.
huge difference.
I've
Yeah.
had several people do that, and it's just a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah. So start looking at other factors.
Yeah, and you use the word dosing. That is very important as well,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you do have movement issues that are very inflammatory.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it can be tricky. So let's say you have a low back issue. Maybe you've had a bulging disc or something at some point. You have some kind of inflammatory type thing going on. Dosage can be so specific, it's ridiculous. I mean, to the point where 2 reps is good, but 3 reps is a setback.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard. That's hard. So you really just got to listen to your body, use your assess, reassess, let that guide you, and try to keep tabs on that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
don't always assume more is better.
Yeah. That one's tricky, because when you were talking about I believe it was your back pain,
Yeah.
you were doing drills,
Mm-hmm.
Every 20 minutes for the duration of the day. It sounded like
Yeah.
you were attacking that thing.
Yeah, like in Alicia's story. We went over Alicia's
Oh, yeah.
back pain story.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. She's doing drills constantly.
Yeah. And when I first started thinking about this stuff, I was doing it once a day,
Right.
when I was working on my knee.
Right.
And then, on the other side of it, I was using we talked about this once. I was using a percussion gun,
Right.
and it was really helpful. It was like I would kind of attack this one area and it felt really good. And then I could do a squat and it would feel way better. And
Hmm.
then one day it made it worse.
Yeah.
And you were like, how long are you doing it for?
Right. I remember that.
Because I was just thinking, it worked good for a little bit. Let me just keep going. Let me just keep working on it.
It's human nature.
And it really assessed very poorly after that. So I kind of abandoned that tool
Hmm.
altogether. But it just shows that like the dosage
Big time.
can matter, right?
It absolutely can matter. And it's just, that's hard. That's hard to figure out, especially when you have an inflammatory issue, because you don't know how you're going to respond. And then sometimes those issues, those negative responses come later.
Hmm.
That makes it really hard.
Where there's like a time delay, you mean?
Time delay, like 48 hours. So,
Interesting.
yeah, especially with people who have kind of habituated inflammatory responses to movement. I mean, when I say habituated, I literally mean made it a habit. Like the body's response, this is just the body's response a day or two later. That makes it really challenging. And it does come back to the fuel conversation,
Mm-hmm.
but it also comes back to like, what can you do to support your brain and nervous system as you work through the exercises? A lot of times we use breathing drills to do that. And of course, nutrition matters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, nutrition matters. But sometimes when you kind of sandwich the breathing drills, like CO2 tolerance drills, into your practice, you are giving your brain and nervous system immediate fuel. And that can really help with circulation and can really help reduce threat and make you more tolerant of the body's responses. So hopefully you don't have those inflammatory responses a few days later.
Mm-hmm. So going back a little bit, we talked about, picking an assessment, a movement that you can assess to test some drills. What about, like, what would be some non-proprioceptive drills that you might recommend people try
Mm.
and assess just to learn, hey, is my high payoff drill not actually a movement? Is it a vision drill? Is it a vestibular
Yes.
drill? Like what would you recommend on that front? Because I think exploration is key here, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. Both of what you just mentioned is great. So less of a proprioceptive, approach. You can try a vision drill, and they're very, very impactful. Sometimes you can get more out of a vision drill than any proprioceptive tool that you're trying. It's kind of can go both ways too, though. I'll explain why. But what somebody could try is basic, let's say, pencil push-up. So
Mm-hmm.
we've talked about that before, where you take a visual target like a tip of a pen, hold it out in front of you at an arm's length away, and you start to basically bring it in towards the tip of your nose. So there's two targets. You can go tip of the nose or you can go bridge of the nose. There's different reasons why. They just involve slightly different nerves. But those are our two targets to begin with. You follow the target in as close as you can. Both eyes are tracking it. And you get it as close to your face or your nose as possible without the target splitting into two. If it splits into two, you've gone too far. So kind of judge your range of motion based on that. Might get a little fuzzy, that's normal, but we want one target. Get in as close as you can, and then you're going to start to follow it back out away from your face. So this is the skill of convergence, where we track it in, divergence, where we track it out.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a great place to start. Just a very easily accessible vision drill that people can generally do without too much issue at first. And then you would reassess the same way that we described. You need your baseline first.
Mm-hmm.
Then you would do, let's say, 3 to 5 repetitions of the pencil push-up and then immediately reassess.
Yeah. So do your forward bend, do your squat,
Exactly.
whatever movement you chose.
Yes,
Yeah.
even if it seems unrelated.
Yeah.
Because that's the fun thing about neurology. It is the most holistic of all the sciences. You can use your eyes to fix your knee. And it happens all the time, which is wild. And even after all these years, it's still exciting to me and still crazy, but it can work. Now, At first, when you're just getting into this kind of material, it seems very random because it's like, all right, well, I'm just doing this and then I'm seeing, like, does it help me? Like, where, like, is there any structure to this?
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell people at first, no, at first, there's not really structure to this because you're not ready for that structure.
Mm-hmm.
Explore, play, certainly learn about the different systems we can target. The visual system, the vestibular system was another one you mentioned there. We have a whole set of vestibular exercises that you could play with. A classic one is called the VOR,
Mm-hmm.
where you take that same vision target that you use for pencil push-ups, place it out in front of you at an arm's length, look at it, and then start moving your head left and right while keeping your eyes on the target. That's called a horizontal VOR. Okay, it's another example. And you can play with these different systems and see what the response is. And it's at first it's kind of freestyle,
Mm-hmm.
right? It doesn't have a lot of structure to it because you're not ready for the structure yet. Play and explore, see what your body's response is. You're looking for the paradigm shift. You're looking for that moment where you do something with your eyes or your inner ear and your global function is upregulated in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Range of motion gets better, pain goes down, whatever the case might be. Maybe you just feel better. Maybe it
Mm-hmm.
enhanced your mood. Maybe you used it as part of your warm up before strength training, and you noticed that right away you felt a little bit more stable, a little bit more solid,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whatever the case might be. There really shouldn't be a ton of structure to it at first, but then as you start to move into our curriculum, we now have structure. We're talking about very specific brain areas, how to assess them. We move away from using range of motion testing as much as we do at this kind of entry level. Still use it, still valuable. We move away from it to some degree because now we're looking at specific brain areas and what those brain areas are related to, such as like the cerebellum
Mm-hmm.
being related to coordination.
Mm-hmm.
So then we would use cerebellar tests that test a person's coordination, and that would become our assess reassess. It would also
Mm-hmm.
tell us information about what side of the cerebellum might need work, what side of the cortex might need work. So there is a lot of structure if you want to get into it, and that's what we teach in our courses. But at first, there's not a lot of structure, and that's actually a good thing. And you don't have to be a professional with applied neurology. You don't actually have to know the brain areas. You just have to know to assess and reassess.
Yeah.
And getting that exposure to those other systems is important too. I think just because it gives you tools that you can pull from your toolbox and try different drills. So exploring the visual system, totally a great idea. The vestibular system, great idea. You can go on my YouTube channel and get
Mm-hmm.
several vision and vestibular exercises to play with, and you just work through them, better, same, or worse. Again,
Mm-hmm.
just exploring. You could also, to add to that, you could also try some breathing exercises.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's another very impactful category of training. I mean, these are the things we teach in our foundations course, right? We
Yeah.
teach people proprioceptive work, but then we also teach them entry-level vision, entry-level vestibular, entry-level breathing. And it does get a little bit more specific in the course, but these things that I'm mentioning because this is what we truly believe are the most important foundations, the most important systems to work with to
Mm-hmm.
get results. Breathing's a great one. Lots of different kinds of breathing exercises. Again, you can find them on my YouTube channel. But CO2 breathing drills, we have a category of drills that we call diaphragm stretches. These are all really, really useful really useful tools that can be quite helpful on seemingly unrelated pain and mobility issues, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. The YouTube is a great resource. And also, if you've been listening to the podcast, I mean, every episode you're dropping new, different stimulus that
Yes.
people can use to target specific systems. So if you want to explore, even if you don't know where you are in terms of your neurology, you want to just see, hey, does my vestibular system, does stimulating it have good results for me.
Yeah.
Like, you can just try that stuff. And we've gone through so many, the parasympathetic system. We've talked
Yes.
about, there's just a wealth of information there to review, even if you've listened to it before. But
Yeah.
when you try a new drill, right? Like, you've
Mhm.
picked your assessment. Now you're in the exploration phase. You're trying different things. How long do you stick to something before trying something else?
Hmm.
Is it like, hey, I didn't get any result, or I got a negative result, I'm just going to discard this and move on until I find something? Or should you try it a few times in a week? Should you try it over the course? Like, how long should someone stick with a potential stimulus before they make a decision?
That's a great question. I don't think about that enough anymore. So I am so confident in the nervous system telling me the truth
Yeah.
that if I don't get the result that I'm looking for immediately, I do move on. And that is something I forget that is so foreign to somebody who's just learning. See, people on Instagram do this to me a lot. They watch a video, they get in the comments and they say, okay, cool. So how long should I do this for? And I'm like, well, I told you in the video, just do it and see if it helped. If it helped, keep doing it. If it didn't, it's not the right stimulus for you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these people that do this to me assume that I'm only teaching them something that is healthy for them. But as you get to, if you watch my content enough and you get to know me more, you realize what I'm saying is, don't trust me, please. Trust your own nervous system, because I don't know what's going to help you. I have good ideas for you. I do offer people content based on common patterns I see and exercises that seem to be high percentage for the vast majority of people, but it doesn't mean it's going to be the right stimulus for you. And so sometimes people make that mistake and they go, hey, I'm going to do this every single day for 2 weeks and see how I feel. And I'm like, no. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You don't need to force an exercise to help you with time and frequency. You just need to ask your nervous system, is this the right input? And it will tell you immediately. And that's this better, same, or worse concept, from the assessment process. So when I'm working on a specific goal, whether it's a mobility restriction, a pain issue, performance goal, I'm going to use the assess reassess to tell me in the moment, is this a good idea for me to pursue? If it's a good idea for me to pursue, I'm going to get some kind of improved output that I can measure. Range of motion increases, pain goes down, strength improves, stability improves, those types of things. Balance improves. That can be an assessment too. And if I get that response, I now have validation that this goes in my high payoff toolbox and is worth continuing to practice to see if it helps me with my goal.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't get that response, like if I get worse or I get no change, I will often tell people with no change, maybe try it again, just to see if hitting the target better can get you the change that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But if a drill makes you worse and you've kind of played with it a little bit, you've adjusted the way you're doing it, position, speed, whatever, any variable that feels logical, and you're getting worse, I will never tell somebody. I've never, ever in my career told them, keep practicing this. I know it hurts, but it's going to get better. I have never said that ever in my life. It makes no sense. When you know that you could be one step away from finding an input that actually makes you better in the moment and improves you, why the heck would I try to force the nervous system to change with the wrong input, something that's being perceived as threatening? Which you probably now know my opinion on a lot of the traditional physical therapy that happens where people are being pushed into positions and they have a pain face and they're yelling and they're like, oh, it hurts. And they're trying to buy themselves 3 degrees of knee flexion after surgery. And they have a PT pushing them into forced range of motion. That's insane to me. I come along and I open up a little vial of peppermint oil. And I'm like, hey, smell this with your right nostril. Okay, there's your 6 degrees of knee flexion. Now go home and do this. Every time you do your exercise, smell the peppermint oil through the right nostril, do the knee exercise, and now we get some change that we've we've kind of nurtured the nervous system into granting us that performance without us forcing it.
Yeah.
That's the coolest thing about neurology, is that knowing your inputs, it's like having the right key to the door instead of trying to knock the door down.
No, that's huge. And that's revelatory, because I think if you come from like a strength and fitness background, which I think a lot of people do,
Yeah.
the normal protocol is do an exercise over the course of a period of time.
Mhm.
That's your programming. Maybe you increase sets and reps or whatever, or weight.
Mhm.
And then over time, you will become better at this thing.
Right.
You'll be stronger. You'll be able to stretch more, whatever.
Yes. Well,
But with
let me
applied
just
neurology, that's not really the
right.
scale we're working at.
Yes, and I guess so. It's important to make this distinction. So the conversation of progressive overload, right? More of our like strength and conditioning principles, if you will. I'm not saying I'm against progressive overload at all. It's necessary, and it's really the same conversation that I have with people about creating neuroplasticity, right? It's training with the right volume, intensity, and frequency to create long-term change over time physiologically, right? With like progressive overload, but neurologically, as far as plasticity goes, it's really the same thing to me, and I'm not against it at all, unless we're trying to force something and we don't have to. We do have to train for these results, and this is important for people to hear. We don't just wave peppermint oil in front of someone's right nostril and expect long-term results necessarily. This has to be, these things that we do with applied neuro, they have to be trained over time. And yes, weird things happen all the time. We smell the peppermint oil in the right nostril, pain goes away, never comes back. That's going to happen sometimes, but we try not to get distracted by the coolness of that. Because realistically speaking, it's going to take these combined, things that we put together to try to get the job done in a more efficient way with less pain, and hopefully in a faster way, which I think is where applied neuro really excels. Right? We can still use the principles of progressive overload with training, but we can generally find faster results by sprinkling the neuro on top of it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And I think to disambiguate, a strength goal is different from like a mobility or pain issue that you're trying to solve, right?
Yeah. Yes and no. It depends.
All right. Talk to me about that.
So it's just kind of like, it's all the same to me. I know what you're saying. It's all the same to me, because strength is an output, pain is an output, mobility is an output. It's all granted by the nervous system. So I can change inputs to get instantaneous changes in the output. But pain prevents us from doing the strength stuff a lot of times.
Right.
So it's different in that sense.
Right.
So we sometimes have to deal with the pain issues and deal with the mobility restrictions, whatever they are, before we get to a place where we can practice strength the way that we want to and safely. Right. So sometimes there's kind of a hierarchy to dealing with some of that stuff first before the other stuff makes sense.
Yeah, maybe before super loading your squat, you might want to work on that hip mobility issue, or that ankle mobility issue, or that knee pain issue, so that you can do that strength training safely at load.
Yeah, exactly. Now to throw a little curveball in that, I have experienced where load, like physical load, is the stimulus that makes the pain and mobility go away.
I've experienced that.
Yes. Yeah. So it's this is just part of the journey, and kind of gathering the information and seeing what helps a person and what doesn't. But especially well-trained people who they have athletic backgrounds, they're very comfortable going under load. They're an athlete of some kind, and load is a big part of it. Sometimes bypassing some of what you would consider like the entry level, like rehab stuff. Sometimes bypassing that altogether and going to pretty heavily loaded, challenging things that might be exactly the wrong idea for one person ends up being the entry point for this person.
Yeah.
And sometimes
Sure.
that person gets sucked into rehabilitation and they start going through this vicious cycle that is essentially deconditioning their brain and body. And they can't get out of pain because you're never challenging them enough.
Yeah, what they need is more stimulus, not less.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It got to be the right stimulus, and we're still concerned about different dosing elements, but it's just really interesting to experience that. In fact, going back to that story, I don't know how many podcasts ago was that, Tony, that we did Alicia's back pain story, maybe like 4 or 5 episodes or something.
Yeah.
So Alicia did all this neuro stuff to get her to a point of good function with much less pain. And then she kind of got to this point where she was like, okay, this is taking me as far as it's going to take me. And she immediately went right back to her strength training routine.
Mm-hmm.
And admittedly was even working through some discomfort / pain at times.
Mm-hmm.
And that catapulted her into a healthy state again.
Yeah.
And had she stayed on the rehab road, I don't know how much longer that would have taken her. Like, would that eventually kind of started regressing her? Like, I don't know. But, she has experience with her body and stuff. And so she knew at some point, I got to get back to it and get back to my strength training. And that was enormous for her.
Yeah. For what it's worth, for me, strength training is one of the most reliable ways to deal with my nagging knee pain. If I'm not moving a lot, if I'm not doing strength training, it tends to get crankier.
Makes sense.
I
mean, it is a very strong stimulus, strength training. Very, very good one. So much going on. I've had that experience a lot of times where just like, oh, this hurts. What the heck? I'm going to work out. Get a good workout. Pain's gone. Okay, nice. I don't have to mess around with any wackiness to try to deal with this.
No peppermint oil today.
Exactly.
So for the motivated, methodical neophyte, and actually I want to tangent just for a second. We have a whole episode on taking a history.
Yeah.
And all these episodes on specific systems and how to be very targeted with our stimulus. But in this case, if you just want to try a bunch of stuff and see what sticks, I'm imagining a framework that looks something like this. You pick a movement that's an assessment.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you pick a couple because you don't know which assessments are going to be very telling for you yet. So you might do a squat, you might do a forward bend, and you might do an arm raise. And those are the 3 things that you're going to throw a bunch of stimulus at.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have, let's say it's a spreadsheet or a chart or whatever, and you could have made it better, made it worse, or no change, right?
Yep.
And today I'm going to try 3 of these, and I'm just going to put a check in that box. Better, worse, no change. Better, worse, no change. For each assessment movement. Mm-hmm. Squat, forward bend, arm raise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Until you've tried some visual stuff, you tried some vestibular stuff, you tried some proprioceptive stuff, you've kind of run through a quick battery of all of these things.
Yes.
And from that, you should see a couple check boxes on an assessment that say, this is better, reliably.
Mm-hmm.
Those are your high payoff drills. Mm-hmm. And that process might take, a couple weeks to really go through, depending on how regimented you're being.
Yes. And as you find those high payoffs, put them into that toolbox and start integrating them into your life. Mm-hmm. Even if I think the best way to get overall threat reduction is to practice with more frequency but less volume. Mm-hmm. So it's a really great thing to just kind of take a few minutes break out of your day, do a couple of your high payoff drills. I think it's really good for people. I actually have a template to kind of describe what you were just drawing up in your mind there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So breathe, see, balance, move, integrate.
Amazing.
Yeah. Breathe, see, balance, move, integrate. I haven't said this in a long time, so I'm glad you made me think of it. So breathing drills, okay? See, vision drills, balance, vestibular drills, okay? Breathe, see, balance, move would be proprioception.
Mm-hmm.
and then integrate, this is fun, combinations. So
Mm.
a lot of our breathing exercises, vision exercises, balance exercises, and proprioceptive exercises, the way we teach them, they feel very isolated in nature. That's fine. That's kind of how we keep track of the stimulus and what it's doing. And we find it valuable to work in isolation first, but eventually more integration. And that's when we would take lots of different things and combine them. So,
Yeah.
learning to juggle. Learning to juggle is an integrated drill. Uses proprioception, uses visual skills, uses vestibular skills. So, any kind of athletic drill. So, you can actually use this assess, reassess process that we're describing with any kind of athletic integrated type exercise. And sometimes that's where you get your best results, which is
Mm-hmm.
really cool too. So we've got lots of cool stuff to kind of fit that category that we teach our students. One of our favorites is something called a coordination chart. And a coordination chart is just, there's a bunch of images on a piece of paper that you put on the wall and you assign movements to the images. Ours is stars that are in one of three positions relative to a vertical line.
Hmm.
So if the star is on the right side of the line, you would do something, let's say, with the right side of your body. If it was on the left side movement, middle, make it whatever you want. So you can kind of imagine reading the chart the same way you would read text. And each image is telling you what to do. So right star might mean jump right, come back to center. Left star might mean jump left, come back to center. Middle star might mean squat. And so this is an example of an integrated drill that we would construct that uses proprioception, because
Mm-hmm.
you're moving. It uses your vestibular sense because you're traveling through space. And it
Mm-hmm.
uses your visual sense because you're processing what the image is telling you and then making a movement output with it.
Yeah.
So that's a classic example of an integrated drill. And sometimes those are the best types of drills for a particular person. So breathe, see, balance, move, integrate. That's kind of your template to kind of work through some of this stuff and have some fun with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like everybody's homework should be to run through this and try to identify a high payoff drill and then integrate it. And over
Exactly.
time, start adding complexities, start
Yes.
incorporating more systems in that way.
Yeah. And you'll get clues too. That's the fun part is you'll start seeing the types of things that you tend to respond best to. And that can be really valuable. And sometimes, if you're a real nerd, you can start to see the patterns too with stuff that might be making you worse.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be really valuable in your process for, dealing with a pain issue or something.
You're practicing interoception every time you do this, right? You're getting better and better at self-assessing.
You are, yes.
How are you feeling before and after? But also, you're creating your own profile, your own neuro profile,
Yeah.
right? You've got your history, and now you're starting to connect dots and say, oh man, yeah, every time I do this, things don't work out so great for me. Every time I do this, I feel good. You're starting to become your own, neuro coach in that way.
Yes, you're becoming the authority on your own body. It's so powerful. It's so powerful because if you haven't been exposed to something like this before, you don't even expect that you can get better. You just don't. You don't know it's possible. You've probably had a bunch of experiences in the past that just made you frustrated. I did my exercises, my PT exercises. I'm not sure what they did for me. And the cool thing about using this assess, reassess, and getting familiar with this is that you get to understand whether or not your efforts are paying off right now. And as you learn more about how the brain and nervous system works, how your nervous system is monitoring every moment of your existence and asking the question, is this safe? Is this safe? Is this safe? Is this safe? That's all it's doing, literally. And what you are doing is you are organizing your responses to these drills and giving your nervous system and brain and body what it is responding to best. And that's that process of threat reduction that we talk to. People who take this seriously for 3 to 6 months get some really remarkable changes with their health and performance and just overall how they feel. It's having like that high payoff routine. I always encourage people to have a high payoff routine, whether that's one exercise that you're checking in with a couple times a day when you feel you need it, or maybe it turns into a routine for you, 5 drills, 6 drills, something like that. You can take a break, practice your drills, incorporate them into your warm-ups or cool downs with your other fitness efforts. It can go a really long way over time because you're basically just continuously giving your brain and nervous system the type of stimulus that it does best with.
Yeah. This is great.
All right, there it is. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Remember, if you want to get a little refresher, but also learn some other tidbits of information regarding the assess reassess process, you can go watch my free masterclass. We'll link it in the show notes. You can also find it on any of our social media platforms. That's a really good experience to have because I basically take you through everything we discussed today in real time. So thank you so much for listening. Our podcast really is thirsty for some reviews. So if you are enjoying the podcast episodes, please go give us a review. That would be super helpful. It goes really, really far for us. That's it for today. We'll be back soon.